Hello, and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and I'm joined now by Alex Stewart.
Good morning, Joe.
And Seb Stafford-Bloor.
Hello, Joe Devine.
Hello. Welcome to today's episode. This is a Sensible Transfers episode. It's the final in the Sensible Transfers series. We'll be discussing all the names that you could have ever hoped that we'll discuss. Probably not, but some very interesting players will appear on our list. And of course, the concept for today is to talk about individual players that may or may not be leaving the clubs that they currently play at, where they might fit in, where they might go, and have conversations around that. It's all very exciting. And we've got a very exciting part 2 to today's episode as well, don't we, Seb?
We sure do. We have quite a long chat with David Ornstein, who talks us through what life's like for him at this time of year, what it's like to try and break exclusive stories, and some of the hidden pressures that he experiences in his job. And it's really interesting. And we accidentally wake Mrs. Ornstein up from a nap, which I feel like we should apologise for. But that will become obvious in part 2 why that happened.
Right, okay, I hope so, because at the moment it just sounds weird. But, hey.
But it's a cliffhanger. We're building suspense and intrigue about part 2. I think that's a good way of doing it.
Ornstein Unplugged, yeah? It's exactly to rival Nirvana's MTV appearance. It's the sort of thing that's going to run on a music channel every other week for the rest of time because it's so good. Yeah.
Well, he also has some very good advice for young journalists. So if you fancy yourself as a bit of a future Ornstein, then give that a listen to.
Well, I'll have to listen then because I'm
too
young.
Old to be you're not young.
I am
30,
young.
You are disqualified from being young.
Well, I will leave. Well, I know I'm not going to leave you in his hands right now, but I've not been able to say this before, so I'm going to say it now. And then in about 25 minutes, you'll actually be in his hands. I'm going to leave you in the very warm hands and the cool, cool embrace of David Ornstein. Okie dokie. It's the first player now in the Sensible Transfers episode today. Eduardo Camavinga. Or Vinga. I'm not sure. I did try to look up a pronunciation for this young fella's name, but I couldn't find it. I wasn't sure if it was Camavinga or Camavinga. Someone will tell me. He plays for Rennes anyway. And he's 18 at the moment. I think he turns 19 till later this year. He is a central midfielder. Some would say he's a defensive midfielder. Look, I've done some research. Do you want to hear my notes?
You were so proud of your research. You phoned me to tell me about it.
It's because normally I don't have time to do research. But then
definitely want to hear your notes.
Okay, here's my notes.
I don't want you to ad-lib around your shorthand either. I want you to read it literally, please.
Okay. Right, okay, fine. Here we go. Tall, comma. I want to qualify this line a little bit. His play style reminds me of Paul Pogba if Paul Pogba was better at tackling than he was at passing. He's still a bit spindly, presumably has time to bulk. Reminds me of a conversation that I had with my mother. Is Seb short? I mean, I'm going to have to ad-lib around that one to explain it, Seb, if that's all right. Otherwise, that doesn't make any sense.
Proceed.
Thank you. I had a conversation with my mother. My mother listens to the podcast. Hello, Mother. Thank you. And she said to me the other day, "Oh, I don't mean to cast aspersions, but is Seb short?" And I said, "No, I don't think so. He's about, average height. Why do you ask that?" And she said, "Oh, he's always talking about limbs. He's always talking about how long people's limbs are." And he said that you were weirdly tall or something. And I said, "Oh, no, he's just, he just likes." I explained to her about which fits quite nicely for this one because I explained to her about how, players with long legs actually can do tackles that other players without long legs can't do. And we talked about basketball players with arms that are, wingspan that's longer than their height, that sort of thing. So that's why she thought you were short. You're not. Anyway, he played in the centre of midfield for Rennes when they beat PSG when he was just 16 years old. I think that was a performance that lots of people admired of Eduardo Camavinga. And also Statman Dave says that he likes to dictate play, unusually for an 18-year-old. He has composure and he thinks he should go to United. I don't know. Who wants to pick this one up?
I will, because he reminds me of, well, not a young Moussa Dembele, but the player that Moussa Dembele would eventually become under Maurizio Pochettino. So Dembele actually started life. This is the Tottenham Dembele rather than the player who's just moved to Atletico Madrid. Mr. Dembele actually started life as a forward. He was an attacking player, and over the course of his career, he kind of drifted backwards to becoming probably one of the most elegant pivots I've seen. And Camavinga reminds me of him a little bit in the way that he's very press resistant. He is
ball carrying, right?
Yeah, and also it's a style thing, Joe, as well. When you watch opponents press him, he doesn't get flustered. He's happy kind of to dwell on the ball and to take his time and to occasionally kind of roulette his way past a few tacklers in the way that Dembele did. I know it's a little bit of a lazy comparison, but I think that's that's pretty important reference point for people who haven't possibly seen very much of him. But he's
not me.
Not you anymore. Not you. This should be a regular feature. The reading of your notes. I feel like
I might start doing them at the end, because otherwise I feel like I'm going to leave the conversation. But carry on.
No, well, that's it really. I think sometimes with a player like this, there's a little bit of bluster. People kind of assume that as soon as someone hits 18, 19, he must go to a top of the range club. I don't know the latest, but back in November, L'Équipe were suggesting that he was quite close to signing a new contract. I don't know what effect the Media Pro situation and Canal Plus's decision to withdraw their own. I'm not quite sure of that news story at the moment, but I think Canal Plus have withdrawn their own tender for the remaining rights, or they have backed out of whatever rights package they already had. But either way, it's ominous organ music sounding again for French football. So I don't know whether that's had an impact on the contract offer or the negotiations, but there was certainly the intention to extend there, but I'm not sure what his future looks like as a result of that.
I mean, given the way that he's considered as a sort of future world beater, I imagine it probably will have some kind of impact. Alex, how do you feel about him as a player?
Very, very positive. I mean, like you say, that it was that performance against PSG back in August of 2019 that made everybody sit up and take notice of a 16-year-old who genuinely bossed a central midfield against the best club in the league. And Rennes have been kind of quietly getting on with climbing up the table and punching above their weight with some intelligent signings, people like Jeremy Doku, and they've got a decent squad. I don't think there's any doubt that Camavinga's ceiling is high, but I think it's the only slight danger with players like this is when they do explode onto the scene in the way that he did in one game. Yes, his performances were relatively consistent across the course of a season, but there's still a lot of scope for things to go wrong or for him to not quite develop. I think Seb's comparison is a good one. He doesn't dribble often, but when he does, he tends to hit a sort of 70% success rate. His main stuff at the moment is tackling and ball recoveries, and he's extremely good at reading the game and getting those. But he can also go missing in games, and it's a lot of pressure for a player of his age. There's no doubt that he's going to move somewhere big, but I think for him, one more season at Rennes where he can really kind of take on more of a leadership role there and kind of bed in a circumstance. He's been at the Rennes Academy since he was 11, so there's a lot of familiarity and security in that club. I think if he were to go off to a Real Madrid or a Man United in the summer, he could possibly get lost a little bit. Because I think it's maybe one season too early for him to step up. That's not to say he's not a very good player, but I think people sometimes don't appreciate that these players are very, very young sometimes, and such a transition so early on could be quite unsettling.
Absolutely. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about is his position, because I've seen clips of him playing sort of in on the right hand side of a midfield three. I've also seen him playing at the base of a midfield three, and it's difficult. I suppose perhaps this is partly to do with his age. He's still he's quite good at a lot of different things. So it's hard to narrow down exactly what sort of player he's more likely to become. Do you see him more becoming part, or one of the forward two in a midfield three, a defensive midfielder in the holding role, or perhaps one of a double pivot?
It's a really, really good question, and I think it kind of points to sometimes what the issue is with these players, that, particularly if someone's coming through in a club that's not necessarily blessed with a huge amount of talent, then they get moved around depending on where they can most affect the game, rather than having the time to bed into one position and one role. Ultimately, I think probably as a midfielder in a double pivot that allows him to both screen, break up play, tackle. His tackle success rate is really, really good. But also, like Seb says, to be that press-resistant midfielder who collects the ball from the defence but then carries it up. I think if you position him at the base of a midfield three, you lose something of that dynamism. I don't doubt that he could do the role really well. I think if you put him on the right-hand side of a midfield three, possibly you lose some of that defensive ability, or he gets sucked backwards as he's trying to do too much defensive work. So I think a double pivot has got a nice balance to it for him, because it allows him to work on all the facets of his game and try and improve all of them. And maybe he needs to work out what it is he wants to do, because I think sometimes players feel that they're naturally suited to one thing or the other, and that doesn't always chime with what a coach wants them to do. So this is still a very, very young player, very promising player, obviously, but I think bedding into one position and one kind of style of footballer is probably what he needs at this point.
Seb, let me ask you this question, because this will be different from the perspective of different people, particularly at different ages. So Eduardo Camavinga is 18 years old at the moment. You said there's a chance that he could sign an extension. We're not entirely sure, but if he didn't, his contract expires next summer in 2022. If he did, then obviously it would run for longer than that. That massively changes the complexion of any kind of bid that comes in for him, right? Now, on the one hand, you might think that, okay, if a player is seeking a bigger move, they might not want to sign that extension because I think that means the club are more likely to sign that, to release them this summer when they can actually get a transfer fee. On the other hand, he's been, as Alex said, at the club for a long time, since he was a young child. He presumably wants them to be the benefactors of a big transfer fee that comes in for him. Also, at this point in his career, it's probably quite useful for a big transfer fee to be paid for him, and presumably it's better to avoid some of the clubs that might come in for him should he be on the cheap, even if he's not quite the ideal option. Is it actually in this context, hypothesizing, excuse me, of course, could actually kind of suit him to sign an extension, even if he was intending to leave?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, that, isn't it? Because you think that by signing a new contract, you essentially sieve out all the time wasters. Because if you're going to sign him after he's signed an extension, then you're going to have to pay the kind of money, which means you really have to think about what you're about to do with him. There's actually
it's a bit like when you go on first dates and then you just say all the weird stuff. you just kind of sieve out the ones that would have left you in a couple of weeks anyway.
Exactly. I when I was
come back.
When I was a boy, I used to read a comic series called Football Picture Story Monthly. Sorry, and there was actually a chapter of they used to come in these tiny little booklets, like the old Commando magazines. Did you ever read those when you were a young boy?
No.
Alex, that seems like something you might have done. Little war stories.
I may have stumbled across one or two. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, in one of these, it was about these two boys that were of equal promise when they were 16, and it was all full of cliches. Like, one falls in with a really dodgy agent who, if I remember rightly, had a ponytail and some truly awful facial hair. Like, it was like the caricature of the shady agent.
Yes.
And the other one was, he did everything right. Like, he was represented by his dad, and when he was 18, he was based in Scotland, and a big English club, Kings Road United, I think, came in and offered a huge amount of money. But he had a sit-down conversation with the chairman of his club, who said, "Look, we're in financial trouble. We won't stand in your way, but we kind of need you to sign a new contract." And he did, and that was kind of presented parable-like as the way you conduct your career, is like you look after the club that have reared you. And I don't know. I mean, I wonder whether.
And then they refused to sell him.
Yeah, and then he was in
they stopped paying his wages
contract forever. That was the end of the story.
Yeah.
I wonder also whether at 18, most likely he's headed for the very top of the game. I completely accept that. At the same time, though, there's real value in having security at that age, because a lot can change. A star of the game at 18 is not necessarily going to develop into a star at 23. I mean, look at Renato Sanchez. I know he's on the way back, but he spent a lot of time in the wilderness in the last couple of years.
I was thinking about him as also a kind of press-breaking central midfielder.
Yeah, but also, there's a lesson there in that, you jump too quickly, you can get lost, and all of a sudden your career can lose momentum, and then you're having to take a step back. And in his case, probably a step back to where he was when he was 18, 17. And then you kind of have to start again. So there is a little bit of the continuity of preserving a situation which works, which it obviously does for him at the moment in Ligue 1. There's some value to that. The one caveat is he's represented by the Stellar Agency, which is Jonathan Barnett's agency, Gareth Bale's agent. You don't have him as an agent if you're intending to spend the rest of your career playing Ligue 1 football in France.
No, think. Sure. And none would expect Eduardo Camavinga to do so. The next section is on Dayo Upamecano. Of course, 22 years old, RB Leipzig. Release clause somewhere between 36 and 40 million pounds. Whew, what a bargain. So that's as of the summer, right? Not as of January. Check this out. Here's my notes. According to Sportsmole, Liverpool want him. But they also want his centre-back partner, Ibrahima Konate. Oh, no. Yeah. Which one do you go for? No takers for that. Also, I watched a video called "This is Why Every Team Wants Dayo Upamecano," and it was a succession of clips of him tackling, and they were good tackles. So, yeah. Looks good. Seb, let's begin with you. Every time we talk about Dayo Upamecano or Ibrahima Konate, we talk about the other one. This is because they're a fantastic centre-back partnership, and in some cases, it's kind of an unusual thing, isn't it? That clubs, the big clubs are looking out there for centre-backs. Both of them are the same club. Very, very reasonably might be interested in both players. That's an unusual thing. I can't think of many other examples like that.
No, not at a club where they're kind of both vulnerable to being picked off either, because you obviously have the situation where Leipzig could lose both in the same summer. I don't think that will necessarily happen, but it's a difficult one. It's strange also because it's one of those situations where you could probably make the argument that Konate is the better player. I think if I was just a club from somewhere with lots of money to spend and I could only have one, I think I'd choose him. Nevertheless, there's a big profile difference between the two. Upamecano he's kind of been anointed as the chosen one, the next great centre half in Europe, and you can completely understand why that is. He deserves that reputation. At the same time, that profile has really allowed Konate just to develop quietly in the background, and he's the defender of choice for people that sort of probably spend a little bit more time watching Leipzig. I think this is, I forget which one, Alex. I think it's Real Madrid. I think this is a point that you made in a Sensible Transfers video.
Yes, it was. And I think it was Real Madrid.
Well, that's my way of handing over to you in the conversation.
Oh, right.
He's just handed it right back. He's that guy at parties, isn't he, Seb, where you ask him an open question and he just closes it immediately.
Yeah, he just shuts the door on you.
Thanks,
just
mate.
make sure there's no repartee whatsoever.
Yeah. I'm working really hard here to get things flowing, but no, you've decided to just sit here in silence.
Pretty unlikely you'd find me at a party, to be fair.
For that reason.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is right. What Seb is saying. Upamecano, I think, he's the kind of player who very much catches the eye, partly just his physicality, and I'm not talking about his size and strength per se, although he has both in abundance. It's also the way he uses that. He will brush through the first line of the press when he carries the ball out. He strikes the ball very sweetly with the long range of passing. His defending uses that strength extremely well, and he's also, I think both of these defenders have had a real benefit in being nurtured by Willi Orban, who has been at Leipzig forever, as far as I can recall, and is an incredibly solid, no-nonsense defender who's been one of the Bundesliga's best for quite a long time without ever really getting any appreciation for it. And so these two young French centre-backs have come up in his shadow and learned an awful lot from him, and I think that's made them... I think it's made them more disciplined players and put because sometimes players with these natural physical gifts think they can do everything and want to carry the ball out through the first line of the press every time and want to smash it long every time and do all of this cool stuff. And having someone like Orban alongside kind of shouting defensive fundamentals is really important too, and I think that's augmented their abilities. Konate came through the youth program at Sochaux, which is really, really strong. And has produced a lot of good players. I think Upamecano has been I think he was at Salzburg from like 15 or 16. And so he's much more schooled in the kind of the Salzburg-Leipzig style of play and pressing. It's very difficult to say who's going to be better. I kind of tilt towards Seb's opinion. But Upamecano is the one, like you say, who has all of this kind of brouhaha around him. And so clubs that are looking to make a statement signing as much as a quality signing, and he is both, are going to be naturally drawn to Upamecano rather than Konate.
He seems to ease people off the ball. You know what I mean?
That's what I mean about this physicality. It's not you can have a player that's an absolute unit, and you kind of look at them when they're jogging around and you think, God, he's big, he looks strong and difficult to play against. Then when you actually see it deployed with a degree of finesse, like he's like a ballet people dancer off the ball. He's not going through people. He's just easing them off the ball. He's just using his body in a very intelligent way to maneuver players out of the way, to give himself the space to win the ball and then do something with it. Yeah. These are both exceptionally good defenders.
Well, I mean, I know in the video we suggested Dayo Upamecano for Real Madrid. Seb, do you have another option for him?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a trick question because you could probably make the case for pretty much any major side in Europe, with the exception of maybe Manchester City, who seem to be onto a good thing with the Diaz Stones partnership, and Laporte's still there as well. You could certainly see him as a missing piece at Manchester United. He would definitely be an asset at Chelsea. Real Madrid we've covered. I would say that you could make a case of Bayern Munich, although that would involve a bit of a tweak in system and style of defence, so that's probably not that realistic. And Leipzig probably wouldn't want to sell to them anyway. So yeah, he's one of those players that there's going to be an auction at some point, which kind of, I mean, it makes the release clause a bit of a strange one. And you'd think that if that was going to happen, that would be happening now rather than waiting until the summer, because obviously Leipzig wouldn't be able to benefit from any auction as of the summer. So we'll see. But I mean, I think whoever gets him will get a very good player. I think also the point about physicality is that what people the mistake that often gets made is the failure to see some physicality sometimes as a weakness, because with the wrong set of abilities, a very big, strong player is a problem, because he barges through the back of players, he is clumsy, he relies on his physicality, and that's the thing. That's the point about Upamecano. He's not that. He understands how to use his body. Alex raised the point that he's elegant with it. He's kind of balletic in the way that he defends, and that's a very rare quality, and it's kind of perfect because you have all the virtues of being a big guy and someone that can match up 1-to-1 with even the biggest target man you could name, really. Like even if you put him up against, I don't know,
Andy Carroll,
Jan Koller in his prime, you would kind of take Upamecano to win that battle. But at the same time, obviously he can play. He's technically a really good footballer, but also he isn't a liability because of his size, which is it's a very rare combination of abilities.
Well, can I say, I think if I were a footballer, I'd be like Upamecano, because I've always been tall, and as a teenager and as an adult, I've always been a little rotund, shall we say. I'm a loud person, or I should be loud, you would think, because of my mass, yeah? When I move around, I should be making more noise than a small person. But wait, I make less noise because I have shame. And shame is an incredible incentive. And you have shame, you can turn it into almost anything. And I am an exceptionally quiet mover. I glide around. Yeah?
Maybe like some of that quietness is to do the way you move around is sort of fear of doing your back. I mean, every time I see you in real life, one of us ends up tweaking their back by lifting a bit of furniture.
Well, listen, when you're going to be physical, then that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Just saying, I am too like a ballet dancer. I am Dayo Upamecano. Let's move on to the next person now. Sergei Milinkovic Savic. Let's talk about Sergei, because he is playing at Lazio, contract until 2024, so he's locked in for the next 3 years. Seb, you've written a note here to say his agent is actually Matija Kesman, who I have written is probably most famous for playing at Bate Borisov in 2011. That's right, isn't it?
Well, most people would probably say Chelsea. He wasn't,
oh, sorry, yes, Chelsea and Atletico and PSV, but Bate Borisov.
He was very prolific in Holland, and Chelsea signed him right at the beginning of the Abramovich era.
This is his agent, by the way. We're not talking about Milinkovic Savic.
Yeah, no, we'll get to Milinkovic Savic. It just interests me. I always find it interesting when you find an ex-player who's gone into agency. Like I think Tom de Mul, who used to play for Ajax, is Jan Vertonghen's agent, I think. And it happens quite a lot. But yeah, Matija Kesman is his agent, and also weirdly, and this might be a mistake, I looked it up, and he doesn't represent Sergei's brother, which is weird because you usually think that both brothers would,
Would you think that? Would you?
I don't know. You just
Alice and I have
that
separate
it feels
banks, Actually, I don't know if that's true.
Do you really? You don't.
Different banks.
Well, not different accounts. I wasn't expecting you to have a joint account. I just mean you bank with different companies.
Yeah, pretty sure.
That's interesting. Okay.
What? Yeah.
Why is that interesting?
I don't
know, but my wife and I have the same, not bank account, but provider of banking services.
But is that something that changed over when you got married, or was that just because that could just be coincidence?
No, it's not that. It's just like if you, for instance, in Joe's situation, Joe and Alice, like podcast listeners won't know Alice, but she's head of all of our design work. Like there's some personality similarities there, and you'd think that the things that made Joe decide on his bank would also lean Alice towards the same.
How little you know
banking
us.
Company.
Listen. Shush up. Sergei Milinkovic Savic. Okay, listen, we're in danger now of going over some of the things we discussed when we talked about Eduardo Camavinga, because Sergei is also a press-breaking dribbler. He can do that from a central midfield position. Also very tall, has a physicality to him, nice range of passing. We've talked about him quite a lot. In fact, I think we've made a video about him. I'm hesitant to talk too much about him as a player. I want to hear where he is going to go, because people have been talking about him making a move, making a transfer move for a year or two now, at least two. The reality is he would be very expensive, but he's been on lots of clubs' lists, so perhaps this is the same as the Dayo Upamecano conversation. Maybe there's lots of suitors for him, but I want to hear some of them now, Seb.
I may have been checking my phone while you were saying that, because
you seriously weren't listening to me.
Well, because I just assumed you were going to Alex, because we'd done the bank thing, and I thought
he was just have a
conversation.
I was trying to stop you from your false start, but I'll go to Alex first, and then it's coming back to you, Seb. So you better fucking listen.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's been at Lazio for, this is his 6th season now. And Lazio are a club that are probably never going to deliver, top honours, maybe a run in the Coppa Italia or something, but they're not going to win Serie A. So he's 25, he's at the age where he's got enough time with one club and still of the good age profile to move off somewhere much
How old is
bigger. He's 25.
Oh, okay. I thought you said 28.
No. I mean, he'll be 26 in a month or two. I think from a physical perspective, everything about him suggests a transition to the Premier League. He's 6'3". He's excellent at making late runs into the box. He's quite a threat aerially. He's also really good at set pieces. He's scored a cracker of a free kick against Spezia earlier this season. And this kind of he's what Italians would call a mezzala. So he's a midfield player who occupies a central space but then drifts out into the wide areas, orchestrates with long range passing. I can see him working really well at a team that likes to drag teams onto them and then transition rapidly using pacey attacking wide players called Marcus Rashford.
Oh.
Yeah, it could be a thing. I would think it to be more of a thing if Manchester United was still managed by Jose Mourinho. Milinkovic Savic is about as perfect an attacking midfielder for Mourinho as you could probably build from scratch. I don't actually...
What about if they're managed by someone who doesn't seem to really have any kind of preference? With that,
have you got an example in mind of someone like that?
No, I don't know.
The thing about him that I think works for Solskjaer's United is this long passing from deep. He has a really, really good ability to set quick attackers running, whether it's through a central pass or out into the wide areas. And sometimes that can be a bit lacking from United at the moment.
Is he a Pogba replacement, I guess, is the question I really want to ask. And also, if he not necessarily a like-for-like replacement, but if Pogba leaves in the summer, could he serve as a replacement? And also, could he play in a double pivot in a way that Pogba doesn't really seem to enjoy?
For my money, yes, he could be a kind of Pogba-ish player. I don't think he's played in a double pivot for ages, though. So that might be a slight issue.
Well, I mean, Solskjaer just seems very set on the 4-2-3-1.
This is true, but I guess he certainly is capable of being a bit more of an up and down midfielder, sort of box to box type. So I don't think it would be the worst fit. I haven't paid much attention to what he's like defensively, to be fair, so I don't feel entirely qualified to answer that.
Okay, Seb.
I don't like the idea of taking someone from Serie A and asking them to be box to box in the Premier League. I think that can be done, and I think he could do it, but I think that involves a little bit of an adjustment period, and I don't think Manchester United is the place where you go through that. I think it's just too harsh an environment. So it's not really one for me, I don't think.
Can I make a suggestion or a prediction here? I don't know if anybody wants to take anything up with me on this. Sergej Milinkovic-Savic will never leave Serie A.
Yeah, I would go one further. I think he'll never leave Lazio.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he's got a current contract until 2024, and
that would put him at 28 years old.
Yeah, and the price has always been prohibitive.
Yeah,
even before the coronavirus. He's one of those players who I think will just be happy to. I don't think anyone will ever be convinced enough to pay the money that Lazio wants to release him, basically.
I think that says more about Lazio than it does about him, but I also think that's that's very
he's
plausible.
Signing the contracts. I mean, he's I could be wrong, and I'm happy to defer to people who pay more attention to Italian football, but I've never heard any story of him agitating for a move. I mean, he was linked to some pretty big clubs a couple of years ago, maybe about around the time of the last World Cup, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, maybe he just likes living in Rome.
Hey,
I mean, who wouldn't?
Worse places. Yeah.
There are worse places. Also, their stadium, the Stadio Olimpico, built into the mountains there, isn't it? Lots of nice wildlife greenery around it. Yeah, maybe he's a bird watcher. A lot of trees is what I'm saying. They got the Olympic track around the pitch, of course, which isn't to my tastes. But I hear they really love it over there. Anyway, we have to go pretty quickly through the next couple of players. One I feel like we're probably not going to talk about for that long. One I think we could go on for longer. So let's do the quickie first. Jadon Sancho, Borussia Dortmund, contract until 2023. I mean, I would like to discuss this insofar as the conversation we were having the other day related to Haaland being a potential mover and Jadon Sancho being a potential mover. Presumably Dortmund are only going to allow one of them to leave. Jadon Sancho's contract, as we say, does not expire next year, so the club are under no sort of illusions that they need to sell him. And I can't remember the expiration date of Haaland's contract, but essentially we felt like one of them might go this summer. Seb, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, so the Haaland situation is, as of next summer, so 2022, he has a release clause in his contract. But that's not active at the moment and won't be for another 18 months.
Did you read about Chelsea, by the way?
Yeah, like I feel like maybe work with Timo Werner for a little bit first and then see where you are after that, I think is probably the way forward.
I mean, the reporting, I think it was Simon Johnson, actually, who was reporting that the interest was there and that the interest was there to begin the conversation now so as to avoid a situation where that release clause allows all of the other suitors in.
Well, it's difficult because I think if you were a player in Haaland's category, you'd be asking questions about Chelsea's managerial situation because would you bet on Frank Lampard still being there in the summer for next season? I don't think so.
Well, do you think this is what I mean? This is an interesting way of looking at it. Actually, I've not considered this before. We heard all these sort of rumours about Lampard, and poor performances, and the hierarchy at the club weren't particularly pleased, and maybe he's not going to last the season, right? Do you think the reason for the timing around that could be because of January? If the club know that they're seeking to attract big talent, or at least they're starting conversations with big talent in January, and the talent, as you say, might rightly ask questions about the management, that they try to get some kind of runway plan in ahead of time so that they can discuss that when they're talking to new players?
Absolutely. Well, I think, viewed from another perspective, I think they'd be foolish if they didn't do that. Because I think if you're a forward and if you were Erling Haaland, who can pretty much name his next club, you would look at where Chelsea are on the league table. You look at some of the performances. I think more importantly, you look at the way Chelsea have handled both of their high-profile signings from the Bundesliga, so Kai Havertz and obviously Werner, and say, yeah, this isn't going as well as it might do. And there's more than one reason for that, and certainly it's not confined to Frank Lampard's management style or his tactical approach or anything like that, but it's one of the issues. Werner has been soldadoed, which is just a terrible place for a forward of that value to be, and Havertz has had some illness and he hasn't had a proper pre-season. But I think what you would do in that situation as a club is try and provide some reassurance that a major transfer can be handled from the playing perspective better than it has been up to this point. And if that involves suggesting, look, this guy is under pressure and we're reviewing his performance, then I think that kind of does the trick. I don't know beyond that how far the conversation would go, but yeah, it makes sense to me.
Is there a chance that Jadon Sancho goes anywhere other than Manchester United?
I don't think he should go to Manchester United. I think, if anything, the way Manchester United conducted themselves last summer would be a hindrance to that. I mean, we all remember what it was like when the Athletic finally released the report on what actually took place. It transpired that Man United got nowhere near to signing Jadon Sancho, and that was despite what was clearly an awful lot of briefing that was sort of suggesting that it's happening now, next week, no, in 3 days' time, and it's going to be my exclusive in this tabloid, and actually it's all nonsense. I think that becomes annoying, and I think if you look at the way Dortmund responded to some of that noise, it seems that they were provoked by it. From the player's perspective, I think Man United, okay, maybe. I mean, you can always make the case for Manchester United, but I've always liked Sancho at Real Madrid. I just think the personality suits it. I think the way he plays suits it. It's something I'd like to see. I have no idea what he would whether that's feasible or whether that's realistic from Real's perspective, but I think it's just a slightly better fit.
Alex?
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything that Seb says there. I mean, they're both clubs that have a requirement for a right winger who does more than their current right winger, for different reasons. I think with United, it's because ultimately Mason Greenwood ends up as a central striker. With Real, I think the Brazilian youngsters that have been playing in that position haven't really convinced, and they've tried playing people like Lucas Vazquez up there. It does make sense. I think it's very, very difficult. Again, with young players, obviously Sancho is a lot more exposed to first-team football and all of the brouhaha that goes with that. But he's still a young guy, and it's, all of this noise circulating around potential transfers and so on, I think probably does have an impact. And if there's a club like Real Madrid that can conduct their business, more effectively, more subtly, not that that's something that Real Madrid are particularly well known for, but I think that probably would play into his hands. Again, a bit like Haaland, he can probably take his pick of clubs. I think Haaland to Chelsea is a bad idea, by the way. I just don't think it works at all. I can see him and Werner just trying to occupy the same space all of the time and both getting really frustrated with it.
Okay, let's move on now to Ruben Neves at Wolves, which is interesting because Wolves are not having a great time. They haven't had a win in the league since mid-December. Well, it was against Chelsea, and this is for a team that was cooperating in the Europa League last year. So a bit of a fall. Diogo Jota has left too, who was a close associate of Ruben Neves, so presumably it's crossed his mind to leave. And we are speaking, we're recording this not too long after the game against West Brom the other day, when Ruben Neves was subbed after 60 minutes after a pretty terrible performance, described by the Athletic's Tim Spears as absolutely shocking. So there we go. Tim Spears did say more and qualify, but it was a bad performance. Most of the rumours link him to, because there aren't that many, link him to Manchester United, because everybody's linked to Manchester United. I don't really want to have that conversation. So can somebody, what was interesting, particularly for me about Ruben Neves when I was researching, was that there don't appear to be many rumours. Not like there were about a year ago when, lots and lots of clubs were rumoured to be in for him. Most of the news section on Google referred to just playing time. So I don't know who wants to pick this up first.
I'll pick it up because I watched the West Brom game and Wolves were dreadful. It feels as if a number of different things have happened, including obviously the injury to Raul Jimenez, which has taken the teeth out of this side completely, and that's a very difficult thing to manage. Also, in the same season as you've lost Diogo Jota, who was an important part of that, attacking unit. Adama Traore has receded off his peak, fallen back from where he was last season.
Yeah, he hasn't scored in a really long time, has he?
Yeah, he's developed. He's kind of all the bad habits that were that melted out of his game a year ago. A couple of them are back, and it's just not working quite as well. It might be to do with the Jimenez factor. Like there was a really good partnership between the two of them, and there was a kind of an instinct in the way that they played together, which isn't there at the moment. So that might be part of it. But I feel like I don't know what Wolves need. It feels like a sort of, I use the word stagnation in the notes just because it feels like he's been there for longer than probably anyone imagined that he would be. And that there's coming a point where whether Wolves want to or not, they're going to have to reinvent their midfield. João Moutinho cannot play at this level forever. I don't know what the long-term objective is with Leander Dendoncker, who I really like as a player, but he has sort of split duties between the centre of midfield. He can play at the back as well. And Neves, I think he came to Molineux because he could progress into English football, and for many years he did. Now, I don't know. Like he's always been a slightly less aggressive player than people have assumed. Like people focus on the sort of the long-range shooting and the occasional Hollywood pass, but that's not necessarily what he does well all the time. That's not sort of indicative of his reflective of his consistent output. And you wonder whether now's the time for George Mendes to look at the market and think, I need to put him somewhere else. And also, obviously, selling him would raise the kind of fees needed to to lead a reinvention at Wolves.
Right, absolutely.
It's an interesting situation. I just feel like they aren't benefiting from each other as much as they were, if that makes sense.
So where do you see as fit for him?
Well, I would look at the obvious place because of the Mendes connection, I think, is probably Tottenham. I think that would be, if you added him into a midfield, which included Pierre-Emile Højbjerg, Tanguy Ndombele, and you made him the third man, I think that's very interesting.
That is very interesting.
That's a very solid, very Mourinho-ish midfield.
You've caught my attention.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really buy the Man United thing. I don't buy the Liverpool connection anymore because...
Is the money there at Spurs? Let's stay on it.
Let's see what happens with Dele Alli. If Dele Alli is sold, then absolutely there's the money there. I don't know if they it's not going to happen in January, is it? But if Spurs were to sneak one of the Champions League places, which I think is possible, like I could see them finishing fourth, maybe third, then you could say that the revenue streams are, with the provision about crowds being back or not. I think you say the revenue streams are there, so you could make the case. But he's also in a way he's kind of like he's kind of an Atletico Madrid type of player in a way.
Yeah, you think so?
I could see it. I don't know if it would happen, but I could see it because despite everything we've said about him, and Tim Spears is absolutely right. He was dreadful at the weekend, and he's had a few of those performances recently. Despite all of that, he belongs at the top of the game. He's not a Ballon d'Or winner in the future, but he's a very, very good player. And you could make the case for him being an asset to pretty much any side in Europe.
Okay. Alex, how do you feel about Ruben Neves at Spurs? Do you think it's tasty?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. I think, the ability to transition the game from deep is obviously one of his primary qualities. I think the issue that prevents him from going to a Man City or a Liverpool is probably that Wolves don't have a particularly strong pressing game, that they're not front foot aggressive defenders as a team, and so the adaptation for Neves to a team that presses really intensely would probably be quite a tricky one. So a team that sits back, looks to control the pace of the game, and then he can orchestrate attacks from a slightly deeper role. Spurs or Atletico Madrid make perfect sense from that perspective. So yeah, just endorse what Seb says.
Okay, I like it. Well, listen, we're coming to the end now of this section of the podcast. We still have David Ornstein to come, of course, so I hope you will all enjoy that. But before we do finish, this is the last Sensible Transfers podcast episode of January 2021. Seb, I know that there have been a lot of people very keen, very eager to hear your opinion about one particular player. Lots of people have been messaging you, I know, keenly, privately, publicly, some of them, asking you to please talk about Messi. I'm just going to give you 30 seconds now. Please, let's listen, lots of people want it. Let's treat it seriously. Tell me what you think about the current situation. Is he likely to leave in the summer, given that his contract is up? I want to hear your genuine take. Genuinely,
I think, depending on the outcome of the presidential...
And that's all we have time for on today's Tifo podcast episode. Thanks to everyone for listening. Really appreciate your downloading the episode. I hope you can stick around for the David Ornstein section. Seb spoke to him for 20 minutes, and it sounds really, really, really fun. So thanks to David, and we'll be back just to say goodbye at the end of that. So for now, here's David Ornstein.
Okay, David, let's start in a really obvious place. What's it like to be you at the moment?
Tired, exhausted, but that isn't just at the moment, Seb. That's pretty much at any time, and I've got used to it. And we're in an extremely privileged position in our industry as journalists, and specifically in football, because it's ongoing. Despite the pandemic, and we've got something to write and talk about. We're in a transfer window, which is busier than ever. We got our health, and that's the most important thing. But yeah, it's pretty relentless. The transfer window, summer is obviously more interesting in terms of the magnitude of deals, but January's more condensed. and therefore you've got to keep on your toes slightly more than in the summer. Of course, as the summer window draws towards a close, you can't put your phone away, you can't stop concentrating because things can happen at any hour. But you go through a lot of the summer when nothing's happening, whereas in January you don't really. It creeps up so quickly, even more so with all the games that are being played in this truncated season, and the fixture rearrangements with the pandemic. It means you need to always be very sharp on the stories that you've been working on, things that catch your eye, tips you get, investigate them properly, stand them up. And in this industry, the period we're going through with the sort of peak, really, of social media, rumours and speculation and people, as ever, the age-old thing of pushing stories towards media, people perhaps inventing or putting two and two together. As we go further, but also as you rise in your career and become more experienced and respected, it's more important than ever before for you to uphold your standards of integrity and reliability, honesty, follow the correct procedure, and try and cover every base to get things right. And that puts pressure on you. It is stressful, but ultimately it's rewarding because you'll do the best possible job.
Yeah. What interests me is really, I suppose, the exclusive aspect of what you do, in the sense that you're in competition with a lot of other people, because you're not just a transfer reporter, you're a football news reporter, and you tend to report major stories where being first is kind of the entire ball game. What's the pressure like there when you're trying to balance some of the things that you've just mentioned, like accuracy, veracity, versus the need to be quick? And I suppose what's it like to try and juggle the need to be quick and careful at the same time, whilst also competing with all these other forces around the world?
Yeah, the dream is to get that balance absolutely spot on of being first and being completely right. An example of a story I did on Monday in the column, it was the lead in the end, was that West Ham have made a bid over the previous weekend to sign a Sevilla striker. And that was a fine example of having all the information that you need completely corroborated and accurate, and also feeling pretty confident that nobody else had it. It was a bit obscure, I've got to admit, and things came together just how you would like every story to. Exclusive, accurate, first, you name it, perfect. That's not always the case. A few days previously, we broke the story that Arsenal had reached an agreement in principle with Mesut Ozil to terminate his contract, and that was one of the most nerve-wracking stories I've done. There have been numerous, actually, but that was one of the most, because you felt that this was a really seminal moment within the football news landscape, the Arsenal supporting landscape, but it transcended beyond that as well, because it involved Fenerbahce, and they have a vociferous following, not just at the club, but in Turkey on social media and in the mainstream media. Football as a whole has talked about him so much. It transcends into politics, religion, and all sorts of other areas. And when you got this information and you're really comfortable on the multiple sources and the reliability, the concrete nature of your information, you then immediately, when it's a story of such magnitude, worry about somebody else getting it out before you, especially with the Turkish media pretty much charting every development in this story. And that's not something we have sort of sought to do, give a kind of running commentary. You kind of maybe try and pick your battles a little bit and wait for the crescendo, because that's going to be the highest impact, the most interesting, the best for your employers. And that takes a lot of sort of bravery, luck, updating like social media and the wider media, relentlessly looking across all sources, Googling and Twitter searching the name of the people, Ozil in this case, to just check that nothing was coming out. And on tenterhooks, fearing that it wouldn't. But you have to follow your right process, and we started to get wind of that the night before, and actually went to sleep on it, having not done the story. Slight advantage in that Turkey was a few hours ahead, so it was already sort of 1 a.m. there, so we were quite comfortable that it wouldn't come out in Turkey that night. But then in the morning, they're ahead of you, and so you're really worried that they're going to beat you to the punch. And we managed to, I don't know, get lucky, bit of design, bit of luck. Conversely, for the Monday column, I had a line, a much smaller line, that was going to be one of the main lines, but, it wasn't, world exclusive, but it was an exclusive line. And that came out. During Sunday, and it was a blow. It was a really big. It hurt me because I had factored that into my thinking for the Monday column. Told the editors, we'd talked about it. It was there. We'd corroborated it, but it wasn't maybe quite worth bringing out on the Sunday. But it was definitely worth trying to hold to the Monday. Equally, when it came out, it was like a bit of a mini dagger. And then you've got to pick yourself up and move on. Similar with the Richard Garlick story in the previous week, of him leaving the Premier League to take up a job as director of football at Arsenal. That was one that I'd heard rumbling around, and I tried to get bits and bobs of information. I was hoping I was going to hold it for the column exclusively, and then I got some information that meant I had to pounce. Seb, you build up a nous, an instinct, when you've worked in this industry for a long time, and my goodness, I've not worked in it nearly as long as many peers out there across the media. But the longer I've been in, you just know when it's time to go, and you know when you can hold. And on occasions you get it wrong, but with experience you kind of you get a fair judgment. But nerve-wracking. And sorry, I've digressed from your point, so I'll bring it back a little bit. The sort of competition in the market, in the industry, I think if you take the approach of full respect to everybody else, that you've got no entitlement to break these stories, you've got no God-given right to get it before anybody else. You just have to rely on your contacts, your information, your judgment editorially, your process of corroborating and making sure it's accurate. And then a bit of luck in hoping that nobody else has got it, and you're quick. You win some, you lose some. And if you prepare yourself mentally that may come out, it may come out by someone else. How will I react? And try and get your head around it in advance. That does help things a little bit. But don't get me wrong, it's part and parcel of the job. And when you have a story that comes out elsewhere, I'm babbling on here, but I want to make a point. When you have a story that comes out elsewhere, it's really, really painful, even if you do respect it. It really hurts you, because that is your USP. Like, some of our writers can do the most magnificent articles in their own time because only they can do that, because that's their USP. My USP is pretty much the same as loads of other people. And yeah, you could argue no, but you can provide insight afterwards that is better or whatever. But that still doesn't affect the thrill, the adrenaline rush, and the power of your story. And that's why I'll finish with one example. And I won't name the specific story, but there was one over the summer that would have been a huge exclusive. Not on the level of, say, the Telegraph's brilliant work around Project Big Picture. It was a transfer line. And I did, I had it, and I needed to speak to somebody because accuracy always comes before speed. I needed to speak to them verbally. They weren't in a position to speak just then. And so I had to wait. And in that time, and it happens rarely, but it does happen, it came out elsewhere. And then the contact called me back, and I was like, I was in pieces. And he said, "Don't worry, I'll explain everything that's happened, and then you can get an even better follow-up story." And actually, that instant news story, although the people that broke it did really well, and congratulations to them, and I would have loved it to have been me. The nature of news means it gets spread very quickly, and the author isn't really remembered for that long. The person who broke it, a bit of peer respect within the industry, a little bit within the public, but it's gone. The news is out, has a short shelf life, and that's actually quite tricky at The Athletic, because we're based on subscribers, and as soon as a news story is out, people don't need to subscribe. They can just read the first couple of paragraphs, or somebody lifts it and it goes. What's really valuable to the business, and I think to the audiences, is the long in-depth features, the insight, the exclusive nuggets of detail. And that was what I was able to do. And it shows at The Athletic I've got an alternative to my sort of stock and trade, and that is a really good form of journalism. So it's a really difficult dynamic, and it's one that I grapple with every day. But I think I've found a decent balance, and I'm quite content. But you do have to stay really sharp. There are so many good journalists doing so much similar work out there. You can't rest on your laurels. You need to keep your contacts, updated. You need to keep in touch with them. You need to keep having the conversations. You need to be ready to pounce. You won't get them all, but if you do things the right way, you'll get a lot.
2 questions in this area. The first is for you. Obviously, contacts and information is your currency, and you mentioned it right at the beginning of our chat about people that are operating on, shall we say, less than good faith. Has that kind of nonsense made it kind of stained the reputation of your part of the industry, because you have so many people that kind of bullshit their way through stories, or they want attention, or they just use social media, for instance, as a little bit of a game, and it's not serious to them, and they kind of give the whole genre of transfer reporting and breaking news stories a bad name. Was that difficult for you when it happened?
In terms of their influence on me or on the industry?
I suppose the industry, because they wouldn't have any influence on you, because it doesn't really affect what you do. But I suppose the effect is on how people view transfer reporting, for instance, and is that when you're making your name. I mean, a long time back for you in the past, but you have to wade through the cynicism that's resulted from charlatans, essentially.
Yeah, that's a continual battle, and it's something that you struggle with on a daily basis. And I don't have any animosity at all towards people that are putting stuff out that is not right. I've probably put stuff out that hasn't been right with good intentions over the course of my career, and having followed the correct process as well. Information is not, you could even speak to 3, 4, 5 contacts who don't have the exact precise detail that is the truth, and because you've multiply sourced it and followed all your correct procedures as per the guidelines and rules of your employer, then you run it, and there are elements that you find out further down the line were different to what you were reporting. It fills you with shame, and I'm sure for the vast majority of journalists out there, it's the same. And you are comforted by the fact that you did things the right way, but it always gives you pangs of regret that you may have slipped up a bit. Those who do stuff, have been fed stuff, or themselves off their own back do stuff that isn't right. I think sometimes we read a little bit too much into it, because the reliable journalist sources tend to be the most respected by the widest audiences anyway. The other stuff does create a bit of noise, and I can think of stories which it's not fair to go into off the top of my head, which have just been wrong, even from respectable journalists. Again, I don't think they would do so in bad faith. It's slightly frustrating, but as soon as you then get an opportunity to report, it tends to put the record straight, and others eventually, or whether they're before you, tend to do likewise. It's quite rare that the inaccurate stories remain unchallenged and don't get put right at some point. What I do get a little bit annoyed about is when an inaccurate story creates a debate, an innocent debate among lots of good people. So, I often see contemporaries conversing on a story that has appeared in a different country, in our country, in a newspaper, in a website, in a radio station, and they really right-minded people start debating it, and I'm watching their debate on Twitter, thinking, "Well, what are you talking about? That's not actually true," and I want to scream and tell you about it, and very occasionally I do, but what I don't like to do is put somebody else's work down. And for all you know, there is a slight chance that you're wrong, and not always. Like sometimes you'll be completely right, but there are that little crumb of uncertainty means just leave them to it. You know, if they've done it in good faith, and also occasionally I've said to a colleague or a fellow journalist, just to let you know, in the best possible intention, that wasn't true, and sometimes they've reacted quite badly, like, you stick to your contacts and I'll stick to mine, and I don't disrespect that, because they're clearly doing so in good faith.
Yeah.
And so that's a little bit frustrating. In terms of my work personally, I very rarely now get people, for want of a better phrase, trying it on in terms of sources, because they kind of know that I then multiply check my stuff, and it will just embarrass them if they try and pass off some.
You reached your point of critical mass with reputation and, you know, your back catalogue of work, and, you know, what you've got right in the past. So presumably that's what speaks for itself after a certain period of time.
Yeah, and it doesn't always stop people coming to me with wrong information or trying to manipulate whatever subject they want. And you mentioned earlier, it's not just transfer news. I do a lot of other stuff as well across club and wider reporting around all sorts of subjects. Politically, new contracts, changes in staff, any
changes
story.
In hierarchy at clubs.
Changes in hierarchy, boards and stuff like that. And just because that's not as popular as transfer news, it doesn't mean it takes any less work or it's any less tense or intense when you're trying to work on these stories. Just as many egos and agendas. It's just not quite as magnetic from a public conversation point of view. One thing that I find a little bit difficult as well is when you use your channels, whether it's my column or podcast or go on other outlets, video, television, and you kind of say stuff. You wish everyone in the world could hear it, and you know it's right, and you've set a few things straight and provided the accurate latest. And then the next time you turn on a reputable radio or television or pick up a newspaper or website, and you see them saying like the complete opposite and it going unchallenged, it's a little bit frustrating. And then to the sort of crux of kind of one of your points in a really interesting question, just take the West Ham transfer story that I did in Monday's column that I mentioned about the Sevilla striker. One of the first responses on social media was, "I call BS." So he was saying, "I call bullshit" on that. Yeah. And that no, I'm not making this out to be that particularly hurtful, but it winds me up. That's the right way of putting it. It winds me up because, like, of course that's nonsense. Of course I follow the right procedure, but there are some stories where, and luckily you can laugh about it in this case because you've got so much, whether it be evidence or information or corroboration, that it's like, show a bit of respect, not just to me, to the other journalists doing this stuff. When and I sometimes do call, I get in touch with colleagues or former colleagues who are on broadcast media, because I was previously at the BBC, so I know a lot of these guys, and they say, so there are rumours that this is happening, and it's been my story. Yeah. And I get in touch with them and say, what are you talking about? Rumours? You can just say it was reports in The Athletic or wherever I've reported it, David Ornstein, or just reports, full stop. Don't even mention me if you don't want. But don't say rumours.
It's actually exhausting. I was having a conversation with someone a while ago about Luke Shaw and the dynamic between him and Jose Mourinho a few years ago at Manchester United. And it's a conversation about the press conference where Mourinho, I forget the exact wording, but he's said something like, I was controlling Luke's brain or whatever. You remember the incident I'm referring to. And I was in the press conference. I was sat about 10 foot away from Jose Mourinho when he made those remarks. And the assumption of everybody seems to be that everybody else is lying all the time, that everybody's on the take and it's all one big grift. And it's why kind of that I call BS line that you received, it resonates with me. It does wind you up. It's this assumption that everybody is trying to manipulate somebody else or trying to report false information, and it's kind of exhausting, David. It's I tell you what, let's because that's a good segue to my next question, final question, because we've got to let you go. But
no, it's fine.
I've seen you at work, and it was back in the summer. You were reporting on a major transfer story, and obviously, kind of you were filing your updates, throughout an evening, and they were coming in as and when clearly you were getting contacts, and people were coming back to you and returning phone calls and that kind of thing. I suppose my obvious question for you is, how do you balance family life with that? Like, forget at the moment, because no one's having difficulty balancing family life with, we all have to stay at home. But obviously your phone can ring at any time. Like my working day, unless, there's a match or something, less so these days, but my working day generally ends 6-7 o'clock. I can put my computer away, talk to my wife, have supper, that kind of thing. Presumably for you, not quite that simple. So how do you balance that?
The amusing thing is that you asked that question just as my wife, who had been trying to take a few minutes of rest from homeschooling and had fallen asleep, actually just got called by one of the kids shouting "mummy," and she, you may have just heard, shouted "yes," completely not realising that I was recording this, and that sums up the sort
We've
of
gone further behind the curtain than I thought that I should have hoped. Fantastic.
It's poetic timing, really. And it does underline in the most unstaged and unscripted way that the balancing act you have to strike. And firstly, this is nothing new for my wife. She has been with me since, we've been together since university. And so she's experienced my whole journey through journalism from when I came out of university. Got a traineeship on The Guardian, which was a huge year or so in my life, really, and one of the most important processes I went through. And then did a bit of work freelancing in London, and then got onto the BBC website, made my way through the BBC, branched into a bit of sports news broadcasting, and then recently joined The Athletic. So she's seen all the highs and lows and the ups and downs. Kids have come. We've got 2 children now, and they're at the ages of just over 6 and just over 4. So even they've adapted a little bit. But there's never any kind of full adaptation, because this is an all-consuming job, which, while there is a limit to what you do, you can't do the sort of stuff that I do. You can do an element of it, but you can't do the full extent of what I do by having your foot on half throttle.
Yeah.
And I'm sure I could be more efficient about this, no doubt. I could be much better with what time I go to sleep, or how much I look at my phone, wasted time, listening to too many podcasts, listening to too much radio, reading too much stuff in papers, online, and social media, when I could jump to the top of the Twitter timeline rather than scrolling, because I'm 2 hours behind, scrolling through every tweet and realizing in the meantime that I've missed some phone call opportunities or some news breaking, or there's definitely room to be more efficient. But it is that attention to detail. It is the fact that if somebody calls me late at night, that I take that call. Not every time, but when I just sense, again, going back to that nous, that experience, transfer window, you just get almost like a sixth sense, and you'll get it right and wrong, of course. But just knowing that you need to be available, whether it's you to make the call. Sometimes you don't want to make the call. You're tired. You've made too many calls, but you said you'd call that person today. It could come to nothing, and often it does. And you've been on the phone for an hour, maybe even 2 hours, zero zilch. But that call that you made could often lead to an improved relationship, a building of trust, that when the time comes for a story, that person comes to you, or they pick up the phone and corroborate something you've heard. So there is never a wasted moment in journalism. You think there is, but there isn't. I promise you. Unless you are actively sort of wasting your time, and you are allowed time to switch off, and you've got to spend the time with your children and your partner and your family when possible, and you've got to eat, and you've got to exercise, you've got to keep healthy. I do a lot of exercise, not as much as I would like. I walk the dog and I can listen on the walk, and it's a bit of exercise at the same time. I can make some calls. But the human brain and body is a really capable thing, and there is a lot of time in the day as well. So as much work as I put into that column on a Monday, for example, or the podcast that we do with Mark Chapman, or the video that I do that's published on YouTube, or many of my other commitments, while I could spend all week trying to get that column together, I have learned that you can also bring things together on a Sunday. You can make the relevant calls, and it might not be as good as it might have been if you'd spent more time on it, but equally it probably won't be as bad as you think it might be, because you've built up the relationships over time. People will answer the phone, people will reply on text. Don't get me wrong, I get incredibly nervous. I have real highs and lows. At certain points in the week when my column's gone out and my video and my podcast has gone out, I feel relieved for a short amount of time. But my goodness, then you're suddenly on Wednesday, Thursday, and you're thinking it's all going to start up again. And I've got a blank canvas. I've got a whiteboard in front of me with nothing on it. I've got a diary in front of me with no stories or potential lines. And that does pervade into your family life. You can be in a bad mood. You can be nervous. How are a 6-year-old and 4-year-old able to understand why you've disappeared for 2 hours up into your office, especially now that we're mainly all working from home, and when you were meant to be playing with them, and your wife has cooked for you, or you were meant to be cooking, and she's had to leave it, or she's been left high and dry because you were supposed to be in charge. You were meant to be picking the kids up from school, or take them to an activity, or do a family commitment, and then a really important story comes up that can't wait, or you lose the story, and that's my stock and trade. That's what pays my bills. I have to take that call now. So she's really understanding. I think it's hard for family and friends. I've missed loads of commitments over the years, parties, birthdays. I even had to leave a holiday with friends in August of 2019 on the last couple of days, because the day we were flying out, I got told that there was an opportunity to interview Josh Kroenke, and just switched off. It was on transfer deadline day.
When you broke that news to your wife.
That was a really, really intense window. It was when Arsenal signed Nicola Pepe in that window. And again, that shows your highs and lows, because at one point I was reporting that Arsenal weren't in a position to pay the money. And that was true at that moment in time. We have since learned how and why that changed. You can read about it on The Athletic in the big piece we did on the Kroenkes. And I reported that. I remember I was working at Wimbledon on the tennis, and I walked home from a day's play and saw some reports emerging from France that Arsenal had bid for Nicola Pepe. I then tried to stand it up and was told that wasn't accurate, and that they didn't have that money, that level of money at that point in time. Reported that. A week later, I broke the story that Arsenal had reached an agreement with Lille to sign Nicola Pepe for that amount of money. And you hold your hands up and say, it looks like I got that wrong. But with the passage of time, it looks, I know, because I know what happened, that we got it right. And you're open to huge scrutiny, abuse. I get a lot of people, not daily, but regularly, saying he was the one who got Pepe wrong. He's not trustworthy, blah, 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 or he's not perfect. Anyway, just before as the window closed that night, I got confirmation of the Josh Kroenke interview. I was meant to be going away the next day. I thought I was going to miss the holiday entirely. Then I thought, can we postpone the interview? But he could only do that specific day. It meant that I went away on the holiday, and then I left everyone. We were with all our long-term friends in a villa in Marrakesh, and I flew back a day early into London on my own, said goodbye to the kids at the airport, and did the Josh Kroenke interview. It was heartbreaking, but equally, then you get little bonuses, Seb. You make the best of bad situations. So I then went to the airport when everyone arrived, and it was a great celebration. I'd done the interview, and I saw them all, and the kids come running to you. So it's about the moments you do have, you've got to do them properly. So you've got to experience the moments and fully immerse yourself, which isn't easy. Often I'm caught looking at my phone when the kids are asking me questions and my wife tells me off. She says, you very rarely make eye contact with me because you're always concentrating on your phone. So you do get it wrong. But when you can, you focus and you pay them full attention, because she often says to me, even though the moments are maybe increasingly rare, when you do have them, you're really good generally at investing everything in, and don't underestimate how special those moments are. And as I said, it's sad that I've missed a lot of events over the year with family and friends, and now we're in a lockdown where you regret it even more because you don't know when you're going to see them all next. But ultimately, this is the career that I want, I love, I've built, and the thrills, the adrenaline, the excitement of working on these stories, whether it's the breaking stories or developing more in-depth stories that we're doing at The Athletic, that's really, I wouldn't say irreplaceable, because your family moments are more important, but they're wonderful, and it's why you're in the industry. And even in the dark times where you question how good you are, you question your authority, or are things going wrong, you have bad days, when they go well, it's just incredible. And it's like, I've said this on a number of sort of interviews and talks to students and podcasts and things, I had no academic background at all. I was really not very good, to put it bluntly, in exams and growing up, and I was always very envious of the people that just revised on the night before and got the top grades. I revised for months and got average at best grades. But I just worked so hard. And there are still things I could do better, for sure. There are still a lot of mistakes I make all the time. But I do think you're a product of what you put in this industry. Like, it's inconceivable to think, with the amount I put in and the way I try and work the contacts and build towards these crescendos, that if others did the same, they would probably get similar results. And they do. There are loads of top journos out there who get as many, if not more, stories than me. But without that, I definitely wouldn't get what I get. It's a excuse the cliche, you get out what you put in.
No, that's a good place to end, actually, because that's some excellent advice, and it's been great fun, David. And listen, do
more than happy.
Send
sorry for rambling.
Send Tifo's apologies to Mrs. Ornstein for interrupting, and we shall catch up with you again soon, maybe hopefully for a state of the club.
Well, I've got to sneak in a supermarket shop now before the watching the Arsenal-Newcastle game tonight. So it shows, when you get those opportunities, you've got to do so. But just listen to a podcast while you're going round.
Right, well, that was it. There's David and Mrs. Ornstein and Seb Stafford Bloor. So that was fun, wasn't it, Seb?
Sure was.
That sure was. Yeah. Thanks to David, and thanks to Alex Stewart.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks to Seb Stafford Bloor.
Farewell, Joe Devine.
And thanks to The Athletic for giving us all jobs. Now, we'll be back next week with something entirely different, but basically exactly the same. Goodbye.